Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today, Unix, Linux, Privilege Management, what a financial services CISO cares about, featuring guest speaker, SVP and CISO at a financial services company, Nikolai Chernovsky. You're also joined by Beyond Trust Product Manager, Paul Harper, who will run through a brief overview of our Power Broker for Unix and Linux solution towards the end of the webinar, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. And I'd like to remind you to please submit your questions via the chat box in the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. So anytime you have a question, just pop it out in, and I will be monitoring those throughout. Also, today's session is being recorded, and all registrants and attendees will receive a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 2 business days from now. So now that that's all out of the way, I'd like to welcome our expert to the line. Hello, Nikolai. Please take it away. It's all yours.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. So my name is Nikolai Chernovsky, and we're going to walk today through a few topics in privileged access management, and primarily we'll touch upon Linux and Unix and where that space is heading. And before we begin, I'll let you read what you see on the screen, and I'll talk about slightly different things. So couple things about myself that are not on the slide. So I like bicycling, and if you seen a picture of me anywhere on the internet, I'm not really looking like a bicycle type. It's more like Mack truck going down the highway. When you see me on the bicycle, it's very good to drive behind me. And the reason I like to bring it up, so it's a fun fact, did the ride from San Francisco to LA twice on a bicycle. It's a great experience. Would recommend anyone to do it if you want to take your mind off information security, take it into nature, and if you want to see California, that's the best way to do it. So it's 525 miles, and you take it several days to complete, and there's full support of it. An experience you will never forget. What you see that you're not able to see while you're driving it. And second thing that I'm passionate about security. And one thing when I was researching at some point in time about passion, love, and hate, and somebody did an experiment on love and hate. And when they had people talk about love and had people talk about hate, they turn off the sound and let other people see and analyze what do they see through expression, whether they can recognize which person is talking about hate, which person is talking about love, and it turned out it was 50-50, so expressions were almost identical if you don't hear a sound. And my love comes from the love for family, but passion for security, because whatever happens in security space, it interferes with the love for my family, and I'm passionate to fix all the problems that exist there, and part of me doing this talk, it's help to bring you on board along with me, go for the journey, try to make things better, and try to help us collectively to solve this big problem that's called cybersecurity, and one step at a time, and that's the step we're taking at privileged access. So area by itself, it's rather broad, and it can have probably extend itself just to talk about privileged access for a couple hours, so you'll hear abbreviated version of typical privileged access management conversation, and at the end you have the opportunity to see something that you can apply within yours. So what my goal is today, I want to accomplish a couple things. So give you a little bit history where everything is happening. Then we'll talk about challenges and walk away with some recommendations, what potentially can work, what can't work, and you will be able to ask questions, and I'll provide the best answer I can within this particular space. So moving on to our history. So that's my favorite report that I like to read most of the time. And coincidentally, this report came about at the same time when I entered information security space about 10 years ago, 2007. So ever since I've been reading it and looking what the space develops. Any one of you that works with particular incident handling procedures, or if you need to have your improvements in information security program, to me it serves as lessons learned. So good thing people anonymously share what happened to them, and I use this report in my space to apply control that I may be missing and to enhance my information security program from year to year and analyze what's actually developing in space and what techniques threat actors are utilizing these days compared to what they've been using 10 years ago. And the interesting thing that a lot of things that I observed in this report, they haven't really changed much. So most of the time, 10 years ago now, it's the same thing, but more intense. People, threat actors, they are heading down the path of compromising somebody's credentials and leveraging those credentials, get foothold of a company, and then they start traversing over the company's network and get into the either personal information or they get into some information about IP that they're interested in, or creating havoc, or leaving a lot of records behind and leaving the company. So all of it tells, and Verizon does extremely good job. So 62% of all breaches featured occurred last year. They occurred through hacking, and 81 they were stolen or weak passwords. And that's one of the ways where people need to pay attention where actually the risk is and how we can start going in the right direction and what we can do with it. So then the question comes up, why somebody is so interested in getting into companies and what they're looking for, and why this privilege misuse is almost number one, always featured in the report. And we can go a little bit back, actually not too far back. I'm sure you're all reading reports right now that come in online, and almost every day brings additional conversation about what is going on and why privileged account is so prominently featured. So if you look at just 2 months ago, Equifax happened. That's breach of data. So whoever get hold of account through the struts vulnerability, when they get in the system, so obviously didn't steal the information just using vulnerability. They had to have a little bit more in their hands, and they had to dig a little bit deeper, and company obviously didn't really have enough systems in place to prevent something from happening, and threat actor reaching the target, getting hold of information, exfiltrating all data, and selling somewhere else. Then we can start looking at recent activities where Security Exchange Commission, their EDGAR system was compromised, and actually it was not compromised, but it was insider activities, and through unauthorized privileged access, certain transactions came to light and they started being questioned, and that raises a lot more concerns, like what do we know and what we don't know, and how can we prevent those things that we don't know from happening and continue to happen. And if you start looking back a little bit, what other things potentially can happen when somebody gets hold of privileged account, and we can go back to a very famous case about the movie and the company that made this bad movie, Sony, when entire organization literally been paralyzed for several months when bad guys got in and wiped all the systems and they left. So they created a lot of activities, and then all those activities were hidden, and they stole a lot of information, and they left with a bang. So Sony was parked. A lot of incident responders for Sony were sitting in the backlog for Sony for several months and trying to help out to recover the company, bring back all operations, and a lot of things fall back into paper trail. And then you start thinking cause of denial of service. So definitely common thing that people think about if somebody says, what is DDoS or denial of service? First thing comes to mind is Mariah. So those Internet of Things devices came online, they start DDoSing certain companies and the servers. But what people not think about, some case that happened in San Francisco not long ago, I think it's about 10 years ago. So we can say it long ago in the information security space, when administrator for the city left city and locked all the systems there. So city was literally shut down for, I think it's 2 weeks before they, through criminal investigation, brought this miscreant to the justice, and he finally gave the password up, and then they were able to unlock the system. But that's another way of creating denial service. Or if you have, for instance, in your environment, someone accidentally with privileged access misconfigured your email system and open relays, and when you open relays and start relaying traffic for systems that you're not supposed to, you're gonna get blacklisted. So your message or your exchange system will get blacklisted, and unbeknownst to everyone, your emails will stop flowing. So you may be able to get emails, but other organization may not be able to receive your emails. And it does happen, and that's another factor that somebody can overlook when you start thinking about what denial of service is and where it can stem from. So one thing that you don't really see on this slide, and a lot of executives are worried about, it's privileged account could potentially cause an early retirement for certain people. And you can read reports on Equifax. CEO just recently announced leaving, then CIO and CISO, they retired about 2 weeks ago. So many executives happened the same thing, Target, Home Depot. So in all those breaches where a lot of things, bad things happen to organization, a lot of executives will take a hit for whatever just happened. And us as information security practitioners, it's good to look at all those aspects from different directions and different vectors and understand better what potentially could be done, either to improve or how can we prevent certain things from happening and what other venues that actors can take. So then another question comes to mind, it's like why they're interested in financial sectors. And obviously there is something to do with the money. Everyone wants to have them, and the more they have them, some people feel a lot better than others. And typically there's a saying that the money just helps us to suffer worst part of our existence. So typical reasons for threat actors attacking the company is financial, espionage. They made up 83%, and then you have fun, insider, and grudge, which I just mentioned with City of San Francisco. It definitely was grudge, very little sliver. And as any organizations that you can find, threat actors or all those hackers, they're running businesses. They're there to make money, not to lose money. And the easier they can make it, the more they can make it is better for them, and it's worse for us. So my job as information security practitioner to make it as hard as possible, raises barrier for entry if you speak business, so that all the threat actors will essentially give up their targets and have to figure it out the way to find new targets. And I have a little fun story to tell about what you see on the screen. So come up with threat actor Whacker and threat actor Brainy. So if you start following the graphs, at some point threat actor Brainy came to threat actor Whacker and said, well, I like to start a business. I'm really good in running business, but I'm not so good at getting ideas and finance. So Whacker said, what would you like me to do? I said, well, first of all, I need money. So in 2010, Whacker went out and hit a lot of financial sector, get a lot of money, give it to threat actor Brainy. So threat actor Brainy's like, okay, it's pretty good. Now I have capital investment. I'm going to start my big pharmaceutical company, and we're going to make tons of money on the site somewhere. And then he said, well, I don't really have any ideas how to make drugs. So then he went back to actor Whacker and said, like, could you go and get me some ideas from some companies? And you can see it on the graph that in 2012, I think one actor went after espionage and started getting all these intellectual properties out of companies to provide it to Brainy to support the business. And then as any business model, you can see they even out the flow. So you get finance and you get espionage and then you expand so on. Now it's kind of funny story, but in a way, it's easier to remember, and a lot of businesses trying to do the same thing. So they want to have even cash flow or don't have this big ebbs and flows. So in this way, when you go for financial and espionage, you essentially can balance it. In many cases, some reports don't really directly confirm, but indirectly that certain organizations do those things. And when they engage in espionage, they will come sometime later to engage in financial activities as well. Or they use the same techniques that they used in espionage to get into the company, extract information with their intellectual properties. They would use the same techniques on the other company in financial sector to go and get either cash transfers or some other activities. And then something important for you to know, as well as for me to share with you, as a community, we should be sharing this information with us, because whatever is happening, let's say in intellectual property sector, or we say in health sector, if we participate in and share information with them, we may be able to prevent something that may happen in financial sector later on. because those two somewhat related, not really tightly coupled, but I would say loosely coupled, but threat actors may utilize one organization over the other and figure out how information security controls works. So moving on, it's like, so why is it important? Why Linux all of a sudden and Unix become prominent target in financial system? So that takes us back, if you remember yourself back in 1990s, early 2000, most conversation was surrounding about Windows 3.11, then you have Windows 95, Windows XP, and so on, 2000. So those systems were prone to a lot of targets and a lot of vulnerabilities existed at that time. So all the systems that people traditionally saw back in the day when Unix came along and then 2000s brought us Linux, so certain activities start taking place and it opened us to open source where companies start looking at certain things, and traditional thinking was Linux systems or Unix, they're pretty much hard to break in and they have all these things buttoned up, all the code is properly developed and there is hard to get essentially and make use of it. So this situation start changing as attack surface start increasing. So any threat actors, as I mentioned before, they're in business to make money. They wouldn't really go for the market segment that comprises only about 10 or 5% of the entire segment. It was a lot easier to go after Windows. It's everywhere, everyone using them. And then when the scale tipped and a lot of systems start being developed on Linux systems, a lot of things start changing. And now you can see that a lot of vulnerabilities start getting introduced and discovered in Linux system, not like they didn't exist back then. It just no one really paid attention. The same thing, you can make analogy with systems that you use on your day-to-day activities, your cell phones, iPhones, iPads, and Mac. Mac traditionally were sought after as very secure system just for the same reason. A lot of threat actors didn't really care to go after Macs and create vulnerabilities or try to exploit them because it was not worth the effort. You will have to put a lot of thinking through and you have to come up with a lot of different things to get yourself into Mac system versus Windows system where it was wide open and everyone seemed to be running Windows system. So that situation changed, and right now you can see that largest New York Stock Exchange, Euronext, is run on Windows, on Linux. Sorry. So it generates a lot of it's great performance, but also it puts information security practitioners in a state where they need to pay attention to the system that actually create or make up large amount of their population of systems in their asset management. So once they start looking at that, the situation is changing, and now we're paying a lot more attention to what actually Linux system bring to the table, what vulnerabilities they have, and there are many vulnerabilities that we need to pay attention to, and how the systems are managed. That's paradigm shift where you manage Windows system, it's one way, and then you manage Linux system, it's slightly different way, and you need to know slightly different things, how to make sure that they run properly and make sure that vulnerabilities are taken care of and people have right access to the system, and that's where traditionally very little attention was paid to. And so threat actors obviously figured out that once we have bigger threatscape increased, our attack surface, now we can have opportunity to go in and create a little bit problems on the Linux space. So that brings us the challenges, and anyone who looks at identity and access management space and trying to manage accounts, so first thing comes out, most organizations use shared identities. So it's been traditionally when you have people using the same system and this very important system, no one can log out of the system. Once you run the process, it has to run, so multiple people have to have access to the system. Of course, they will have to share their passwords, and it's going to be a unique password, but still, once the password is shared among individuals, somebody sooner or later will forget it, write it down somewhere, or put it in their Excel spreadsheet, store it on their systems, or will figure it out some other way. And this password will end up being compromised. Once somebody gets hold of this account, bad things can happen. Then you have service account, which runs a lot of things for a lot of organizations, and it creates exactly the same problem as shared identities. So when service account starts, typically organization would not really want to stop this account. So it runs continuously for as long as the system runs. And now if this account is being shared with anyone or somebody gets hold of it, or somehow somebody's credentials get compromised and somebody get hold of service accounts, so potentially threat actor can either come in and shut the system down, or they can hijack the process, inject their own things, and start manipulating data that is account could access to, and create all those different vectors that they can attack on. And then another challenge comes along with regulators. So financial space is heavily regulated. Any company operating in finance being subjected to regulation by every state they're operating in. And they don't shy to come in and audit on whatever they think is appropriate, whatever information security controls are appropriate at the company level, and how we're supposed to protect information about their citizens, our citizens of the particular state. So right now the situation is slightly changing, and a lot of states coming with, I would say, trying to outdo each other, and New York State was the first one to step into that conversation and became really active in cybersecurity with their legislation and made mandatory certain things to comply. And I won't be surprised if the other 49 states will come up with their version of whatever they want in cybersecurity. So that will create essentially a nightmare for any financial organization and to follow and to comply with. And probably we'll come up with some ideas how to create either response back to states, or again, I'll leave this conversation out of this, but it's something to follow. So regulators are pretty adamant about what we need to do in the space of privileged accounts. When they come and want to see it, they want to see full traceability and audit. What this account performed, what actions it taken, why somebody logged in particular hour, what the reason behind it, who reviewed it, whether it's been approved, not approved, and a lot of it stems from the previous incidents or breaches that occurred. They involve privileged account misuse. So right now, a lot more scrutiny is being paid to make sure that if someone has information or access to the data and important information for the company, those access are limited and they've been scrutinized every which way. And the big challenge comes on when I started talking about open source code and open systems where people start developing. So when 2000 brought Linux to us, and it's a great platform to run a lot of things and very stable, high performance computing, and a lot of other things came out from it. Some things didn't come out from it. So it seems like market segment on vendor space was eager to respond to whatever threat actors were doing on Windows side, which was bigger target for anyone. And of course, everyone there tries to make some profit everywhere, regardless if it's threat actors or vendors or somebody else. So vendors were responding to the threats that threat actors were creating, and obviously having this big cyber, I keep forgetting this word. So big threat coming on Windows side, most tools were developed around Windows. So now coming to 2010 and beyond, a lot of systems right now, majority of them in financial space running Linux, and what company ended up doing, developing their own tools, but they couldn't really keep up with the market space and how fast they can develop and how good they are. So certain things start falling apart and certain problems start being created. So right now there are companies in vendor space that start making shift from just exclusively taking care of Windows systems, moving to across all platforms, including Macs, Windows, and Linux. And you can also see clearly on the space in antivirus as well. So malware is no different. When I look back in 90s, it was exclusively for Windows. All the viruses were written for Windows. I'm looking right now, viruses are written for all systems, and all vendors are shifting their thinking like, okay, we can't really single out one platform and start thinking about only creating software for this particular segment. We need to think a lot broadly. So we need to cover all the potential threat vectors that anyone can come in, and Linux right now is a target for somebody to get hold of it and start doing bad activities on it. So obviously, privileged access management, having good handle of privileged access management helps with your information security program. I would probably say that every cybersecurity program that's been run for every organization will have some shape or form statements or definitions about privileged access, what this particular company does, how we can segregate regular access from privileged access, how we're going to manage it. There's no way that one can get by without having one. So one thing to make it world a better place and your organization run a lot smoother, it's to create all those controls around privileged access. And so simple things people can do, it's again requirement for segregation of accounts, use different identities for privileged account and to use different identities for your regular account. So you'll create a little bit of a barriers. It would be hard for threat actor just to come in, compromise account. They'll need to figure it out how to get to another account. And then a lot of people right now and financial industry, it's privileged escalation only through appropriate authorization. That's a requirement. So you can't really just go in and I wanted to go and manage system today. So there has to be a reason why I need to be logged into this particular system, what I need to do, and particularly who's going to review what I've done. So it's almost like if you start thinking about where information security space is heading, a lot of it has to do with zero trust. So certain systems will become in very near future a zero trust system where no one trusts anyone, and there has to be layer of necessary complexity that will allow somebody to definitively state that this individual logged into this particular system, that it performed particular action. Here is a trail and everything that is associated with it, that anyone will have undoubtedly zero questions when they read through it. They say, yes, exactly how it happened. This individual came in, they did all the things that they're supposed to do. They pretty much perform all the actions that they were supposed to do, and there are zero traces of any misuse or malicious activity performed by this privileged account. Some of the things also in the works and they need to be addressed. It's how many accounts being created and which accounts have access privileges, which are not. So having a really good system in place around those things and discovering them and analyzing them and stripping them out of the rights that are not supposed to have, it certainly will help. And of course, having a centralized system that does everything in one place makes it easier, make it slim. I mean, not slim, make it really smooth for you to perform all those actions and provide reporting. And if you decide that you need to enforce certain policy and whatever your organization has in a particular space, it's obviously easy task to do within centralized management rather than go and seek throughout all the systems. And now if you think a little bit about the space we're in, on Windows has been taken care of quite some time ago. Is Active Directory coming along, so everyone gravitated towards removing local accounts or disabling them and putting into the Active Directory, and it's easier to keep track. But it didn't. Windows Active Directory didn't provide the granularity that you need for audit reporting. So there is some login, and you would have to write your own and those other things with SIEM if you have in place. But it allows companies to manage centrally all the identity. Then you have this hybrid where you have Linux and Windows, and you need to figure it out how to get from one place to another place, make sure everything's synchronized. LDAP was used where certain accounts could have been pushed in one direction or the other, and two directories could be synchronized. But still on Linux side, there are a lot of local managed accounts that still nobody knows, and especially root level access, the one that we mentioned about. And the other thing that with proper management, in the way I think about it, I want to be in a state where people don't need to remember the passwords. And the best password that you can possibly create is the one that no one knows. Having the ability to have this password that no one knows, but everyone can use the account, or everyone who's entitled to use the account can essentially limit to MTS degrees threat actors that they can come in and exploit this account, because now they don't even know how to get access to this account without really jumping through additional hoops and getting to the system. So those are the things that essentially will help you to improve your cybersecurity program, especially around privileged account, and where you can start. The way I started my thinking and the way I started on my journey on this end, it's analyzing and what the risk each system presents to organization. So you can't really boil the ocean and come back to your organization tomorrow. So I've heard this great talk, we're gonna do this, and every system will have this particular thing implemented. It may be a little bit overwhelming, but focusing on the systems that you know, talking to the business, that they can help you identify which system they do care about, where intellectual properties are, and to where your holy grail is that you need to protect. You can focus and direct all efforts that you can have at your disposal into this particular area and apply controls that will help you to enhance your security on those systems. So you can take them aside, create virtual environments or VLANs, or you can segment hard network if you really have that, or you can put them in a cloud and segment them there. There's a lot of opportunities there, and you need to spend a little bit time to actually understand what are controls and what are the tools available for the systems that you have. So creating this open source code and having Linux being an open environment created opportunities for many organizations to come in with all their flavors. You have SUSE, you have Debian, you have Red Hat, you have some other flavors of Unix, CentOS OS. They somewhat similar in their nature, but in many ways they do have their quirks, and you need to understand what actually the limitations of your systems. And actually one more thing, an extremely important thing, is for how long this organization that create this system actually going to support it. I found through my experience that certain systems that we put in place, they were extremely well supported, run extremely well, but then all of a sudden they said, well, we're no longer going to support it, and we decided to take another route, and now we ended up scrapping whatever Linux flavor we chose. Now we have to go through completely different Linux flavor and implement those systems. So you need to spend a little bit of time and understand the strategy with your Linux vendor, where they head in it, and then apply control that organizations or vendors will support in the future. Otherwise, you'll end up with something that doesn't really work. And then select few tools, do your POCs. Of course, everyone can have their own, define what you want to get out of POC and what you want to present either to your senior management, to the board, what conversations you want to have, what assistance you require, and what your spend is going to be, and how fast you want to go, how slow. Create some timelines, and that will help you essentially articulate to your senior management that you do know, understand the problem, actually know how to solve it, and you know how to take appropriate steps forward to get through and create all those things. And one thing on top, if you have opportunities, you can strengthen your control and add in certain degrees of multi-factor authentication, or I put it adaptive authentication. That's something I think beyond this presentation, so I'm not going to really talk about, but just want to promote this out there, because starting where I started from, passion for my information security, I want to put some sparks in your head as well, and start thinking that there are more ways than one to deal with the problems and how to solve this information security, cybersecurity problem, and how to increase barrier for threat actors entry to your company without really spending a whole lot of money. So you can twist some ideas around and then create this cohesive approach where it makes a lot of sense to you, but anyone who is coming from outside or trying to get hold of your organization may not be a little sense, but they will have difficulties understanding what your strategy is behind and how you can transition from one place and how they can get hold of your organization and what else they can do. So that's tips where you can start your ideas and where you can start your program or enhancing your program around privileged access management. When I looked at access management, it's a big area, and one of the things that I see is going to continue to develop. It's a scrutiny that regulators are putting in all organizations around privileged access. So Equifax, Security Exchange Commission breaches, they will add tremendous amount of work to organizations to apply for their privileged access monitoring. The amount of information that's been leaked out and the breach that occurred at Security Exchange Commission with their Edgar system will certainly highlight this and will be played in many various conversations at government levels, local state levels. They will be looking to get this information, and they will be looking at any systems that operate or any state to make sure that organizations have extremely tight control around privileged activities, because right now it's clearly, if you do have somebody who has access to the system to get so much information, the organization needs to have this control in place. And what I'm seeing, and a lot of it is going to evolve, and organizations will come up with some ideas and put some controls around, and certain things that I'd like to see it happening and moving forward that will happen. It's limited and time-based privileged accounts. It's probably, I wouldn't say the holiest grail of privileged account management, but it's as close as it gets, where no one knows the password and somebody needs this available on demand, either through some workflows or some approval process, and some system will grant this access to an individual for, let's say, 2 hours, 3 hours, or whatever time is, whatever has been approved. Individual gets in there, does whatever activities they need to perform, they've been approved. Somebody has opportunity to go back in, and log is being generated on all the activities. And better yet, if a system is established with somewhat control or somewhat some form of review of activities and alerts whether activities were appropriate or anomalous, that will essentially help organization to keep really close track on what is going on with privileged accounts. And then once individual done with all those activities, they leave and no one knows how password's been created, whatever password was used, how to get hold of account outside of the process. So that's, to me, where I think the market is heading, and to where regulators are heading, and where I'm finding myself heading that directions, trying to scale down this attack surface, that somebody always comes and tries to get this access to privileged access account, and then traverse through entire network and figure it out where they can steal information or download or create problems or blow up my devices on my network. So to me, it's where I think everything is going to head. So I think at this point, I will probably wrap up my conversation, and I'll hand it over to my friends at Beyond Trust, so they can give you some ideas what they do in that space and how potentially they can help with what I just described.
Okay, all right, thanks, Nikolai. So basically, just to reintroduce myself, my name is Paul Harper. I'm a product manager here at Beyond Trust, and like Nikolai said, Beyond Trust has a range of solutions that basically help you deal with privileged accounts or privileged account management to help you basically deal with handling some of those threats, making sure that you're compliant, that sort of stuff. So I focus particularly on the Unix and Linux space, but we'll start just real quick of doing a real high level view of some of the things that you should be thinking about when it comes to privileged accounts. We've actually got it broken up into sections or various solutions, if you like, and they all kind of work together to provide like a shield or a barrier against actually both the insider and an external threat. So going from top to bottom, in fact, we'll probably focus more on those top two boxes because that's most relevant to the stuff that we've just been talking about. So password management, that's really automated changing of passwords, allowing people to access systems or applications without revealing passwords, particularly for privileged accounts, dealing with the security aspects of those machines like SSH keys, that sort of stuff. And then that feeds nicely into to privilege management, right? So when somebody gets onto a box, when they've accessed that machine, regardless of whether they had to check out a password that's been cycled or not, which is obviously best practice, but you have access to a system, you want to be controlling what that user can do when they're on the host. When I say controlling what they do, I know that's a very high-level, generic type statement. So what do I really mean by that? Really stop people from sharing accounts should be #1 priority. And by shared accounts, that includes logging on for things like, as our focus today is Unix and Linux, logging on with the root account. But any standard privileged account, that could be an SA account, a RDBA account, or an R account, administrator. Really doesn't make any difference what it is. You shouldn't be using those accounts. You should be logging on with a regular account and basically elevating to a privileged account, as need be. So stop sharing those accounts. Audit the activity that happens when somebody's logged on with that privileged account, or even anytime that they're doing anything sensitive on a box. If a host or a machine or an application is sensitive, then obviously audit all activity on those machines. And again, it's kind of the same thing when I say control what the user can do. When we talk about least privilege, it really means let the user run the commands or the applications or the tools that they need to do their job, no more and no less. So if you're not fond of the term least privilege, maybe just enough privilege is another way of describing it. In addition to that, a couple of things that Nikolay mentioned is think about the accounts and where they live as well, particularly in the Unix and Linux space. You can see down at the bottom, our PowerBroker Identity Services is an AD bridge. That's really an account consolidation tool. I'm not saying that you have to be using our solution. I'm just saying you want to be thinking about consolidating your accounts into one or as fewer places as possible, because it's much easier to control things like account creation, account disabling if you need to lock out an account, password changes, password policy, all of that good stuff. So anyway, high level, it's some of the stuff that we do here at Beyond Trust. And again, my roles and responsibilities is very specific to the Unix and Linux space. You'll notice that within that privilege management space, we do also cover Windows and Mac. Some of you may realize that Mac is a flavor of Unix, yes, but it's a very, very different flavor compared to all of the other mainstream Unix and Linux flavors. So we actually separate that out just because the way people interact with that system is obviously more Windows-like, as in through a GUI. We do have tools to help with the management of sudo, which is basically better than doing nothing. And then our Unix and Linux tools are really like the next level to control and auditing user activity. So like I said, that leads right into what PowerBroker for Unix and Linux does. And again, without reading these bullets one for one, it really helps people manage the rights, the privileges, the permissions on a system to really stop that insider threat. Or I really shouldn't type just down to the insider. It's basically to stop anyone with malicious intent that is on a host. So typically, that's if you look at the Verizon data breach report, that's your insider threat is definitely the big culprit there. But it really could be anyone who's out to do you harm. Personally, I've worked in this space for a long time, and when I look at what we always refer to as the insider threat, to me, most of those admins or users, however we want to refer to them, when they started off with their job and they got their clearance, they got their access, they were good employees. They were probably buying into the company. They didn't start off day one wanting to do harm by whatever means. That may be damage a company's reputation, cause system outages for other people or the company or the applications, or stealing information or money from a company. Normally that's something that happens over time, and typically those users that become malicious insiders, and I'm kind of doing air quotes there, part of the reason why they become malicious insiders or bad actors is because they can, right? Because the controls aren't in place. So I'll often talk about, good security is as much about keeping honest people honest. Put those controls in place so that people don't get tempted, so that they know it's not worth the risk. And that will really fend off when somebody then gets disgruntled or unhappy or is basically becoming a malicious person. They're more likely just to pack up their stuff, leave, and go somewhere else, rather than knowing that there's tricks or backdoors or ways in which they can do stuff unfeathered and basically cause harm to the systems or a company. So anyway, the way in which we help that keeping honest people honest type activity is we eliminate the sharing of those shared privileged credentials. So again, we make people that log on with their real identity every time. So it's everything they do is tied back to a person. We track or audit their activities. Obviously, that helps with compliance. It keeps the auditor off your back. But again, it's one of those things where I love analogies. To me, it's like if you're walking down the street and there's security cameras, or maybe not walking down the street, you walk into a bank, there's security cameras. It's a big deterrent that will stop somebody from trying to rob the bank, because they know they're being filmed, and the likelihood of getting caught is that much higher. So audit what people are doing, and you don't have to hide the fact that that's taking place. And then system level controls, right? So put controls on the system. When we talk about Unix and Linux, I often talk or even demonstrate often what people are typing at the command line. It's a little bit more than that. You want to be controlling what the system's doing, processes or commands that actually get executed, not necessarily what somebody types, because they're not always the same thing. But again, high level, anyone that's familiar with sudo is used to typing sudo command. Looking at that command that gets issued is definitely a very good starting place. The last thing I'm going to say here is PowerBroker for Unix and Linux also does extend to other platforms. I've already mentioned that our PowerBroker platform actually supports Windows and Mac. But in addition to that, we can also extend our controls to really anything that you SSH to. So that can be like devices, routers, switches, access points, firewalls. Doesn't necessarily have to be a true Unix and Linux box. But that's normally where people keep most of their sensitive information, and is definitely a focus for us helping people deal with those privileges. Okay, so how does it work? Again, we don't have that much time. We're gonna keep this kind of quick. The main thing really that this diagram really wants to show is you have your client there in the top left-hand corner. The client being where the person's actually logging on and doing their work. The server, the Unix and Linux host, if you like. Basically, everything else, the big blue box is saying, keep the controls and the audit data away from that machine. Okay, so keep your policy, who can do what. Keep the event log. Basically it's like photographs of someone's activity. The who, what, where, and when, and session recording. Like session data. If you want to basically record what somebody's doing, everything they type, everything they see. Keep all of that away from the machines that they've actually logged on to. So again, you got the indelible audit trail is built over time, and the policy can't be tampered with. So that's really not only a good best practice, but it's also how our PowerBroker product actually works. A little bit more than that, again, just a few things to think about. There will be times when you need to let a normal user elevate to root, and when you do that, you've got to make sure you've got the right controls in place. So let somebody have root level privileges, but still control maybe the files and folders that they can access. Or obviously, best if you can do that centrally. Audit all of the activities that occur on the box, not just what they type, but things like when they run a script. You want to make sure that you're auditing what that script's doing. And also be looking for malicious or tampered binaries. I shouldn't really just limit that to binaries. It could scripts or files basically. So some sort of file integrity monitoring is also going to be a key to part of your overall privileged account management strategy. And then last thing I'm going to do or talk about slide-wise is with our solutions, or whatever solution you would ultimately look for, make sure that all of that audit data you get is usable, right? So you want to be able to have a good index of the audit data that's collected, so that when you're doing a forensics, you can easily identify which which log files you want to look at. If you're doing file integrity monitoring, you can highlight when things happen outside the norm on a host, and again, know to go and review the audit logs around that information. Have the audit logs be readable, right? So we've all seen audit data or log data, particularly on the Unix and Linux platforms, that you basically need to be an engineer or developer in order to dissect them. And have some of your reporting automated. Just make it drop into your inbox once a day, once a week, once a month, so that you can see a good picture of what's going on in your systems. And the audit data is no good if it's not being reviewed, and nobody wants to sit there and troll through loads of log files. So having a report that churns out once a day or once a week makes it much easier to spot when things are happening outside the norm. Okay, so we've got a slide here that says product demonstration. Obviously we don't have time to walk through all of the things that BeyondTrust can offer. So just because we've been talking a little bit about privilege control, controlling what users can do and auditing those users, I figured I'd at least show you a few things just to give you a picture of some of the controls or capabilities that you get with a solution from BeyondTrust. So I'm already logged into to our console, so I'll just walk you through a few things we can do here. So discovery, when you first install the PowerBroker solution, you'll basically be able to go out, discover all of your hosts. Once you've discovered them, you can profile them, find out information about them, and then basically manage them from a nice simple host view. So this is really just showing you my home lab. It's nothing very exciting. A few Unix boxes, there's a Mac in there, a few different machines with some different software installed on there. We can see what software I've got deployed, the versions, and just so you're aware, things like installing this sort of software to put the controls in place can all be done from the console as well. So we've got, on the action bar, we can do installs, upgrades, and install assignment of policies, update encryption keys, that sort of stuff. So we've got a management of the actual hosts, but probably more importantly is the policy management. And with our solution, we actually allow you to control different types of policies. So a very simple type of policy is a role-based policy. That's just simply the who, what, where, and when of a policy. So when I pick one of my roles, and again I just have a few simple examples, starting a shell, a scanning tool that running elevated shells, that sort of stuff. We can control who's allowed to make a request. So basically, in this case, I'm just saying everyone. Who does it run as? It can be root. That can obviously be individual users or whoever I've got defined in my system. The what basically are just groups of commands, and again, I've got some pre-built groups of commands. You define those based on the commands that certain roles are going to need. The where, so where you can actually submit a command to be elevated, and where it's actually allowed to run, which in the Unix and Linux world doesn't necessarily have to be the same host. And then obviously the when, obviously, do you want this to be in business hours? Do you want it to be any time? Do you want it to be, the working day, the working week, whatever controls you want to put in place for the when. But very, very simple type roles. We do, let me just see if I can find another one here. So in addition to the actual role that you can define, you also have the ability to include scripts with each role. So there's a scripting language that sits underneath the role-based policy. So you can actually get very creative in terms of controls or custom messaging, that sort of stuff. You can build that in with the script editor. Or if you're feeling brave, you can actually use our full script-based policy. I'll actually just show you one here real quick. This allows you to basically write in a scripting language a policy that you can be very, very specific on. Just like writing a shell script, you can use those sort of controls to build out that who, what, where, and when of commands as they're processed. In addition to that, we've got file integrity monitoring. Again, I'm not going to have time to go through really anything in any detail here, but here you just basically choose what it is you want to monitor. I'll just expand this real quick so we can see the file and folder name or location. So if the file is moved or renamed within the current file system, if the file's moved to a different file system, file moved or renamed on the current folder moved or renamed on the current file system, and just go through some of these real quick. File and folder size change, the UID changes, the GID has changed. Obviously hash the file, tell me if the hash has changed. So you can build all of this into your policy, so that not only do you control who can do what, where they can do it, but you can also be making sure that that system, or the integrity of that system, remains in place as well. So when you let somebody elevate a particular command, you want to make sure that that command hasn't been tampered with. When I say command, it's obviously a binary on the back end. So make sure that that system hasn't been tampered with. So when somebody runs that script or binary, you can be sure that it is what you intended to let them elevate. Okay, so like I say, not going to be like a full demo. That was just to give you a brief view of some of the controls that you can put in place with PowerBroker. By no means an extensive review, but I want to leave a few minutes at the end in case we've got any questions. So I'm actually just going to turn control back over to Sarah, I think, to wrap this one up.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Paul. You guys, so I know that Paul didn't go through a super extensive demo, but if you select yes, we can set up a time to actually walk you through a more thorough one-on-one demo with somebody from Beyond Trust. So if you're interested in being contacted for either a deeper conversation about one of our products or solutions, or for a more thorough one-on-one demo, please select yes. Somebody will be in contact with you. We would love to get you guys squared away with your PAM or your vulnerability management needs. So I'm going to leave this up. Let's dive into a couple of questions. Paul, this came in for you. Are there resources available that show how PowerBroker maps into the individual requirements in regulations like SOX or SWIFT and others like them?
Yeah, so we've actually done, we have a number of documents that our sales guys actually, or sales or the technical team, so any SE that you work with can assist you in showing you how we solve certain regulatory compliance needs. Now, one thing I will say, hopefully without burning up too much time, is whenever you look at some sort of compliance document, and there's a bunch out there, they're often open to interpretation. And not only that, not all requirements actually apply to your business or your system. So sometimes it's good when you're trying to meet compliance, or you've had an audit failure, just to work with us, and we'll show you the right solution and how to implement that solution to solve that compliance need.
We have time for one more question. This came in for you, Nikolai. So what would be the difference between implementing 2 factors and PAM?
Okay, so I think the difference between using 2 factors and PAM, 2 factors, you certainly making it more difficult for someone to compromise privileged account, but you will not be able to go back and trace any activities that your privileged access was performing. So if you're interested only in stopping someone from, or preventing someone from compromising and getting into a system, that would be one angle to look at. But second angle, you're not going to have the benefit of having the ability not to have any password and have full auditability and control over your account. So there are somewhat 2 separate things, and I wouldn't really say they're completely in a conflict. They could be used as complementary, but the benefit of one over the other is one will give you a lot more flexibilities and different control that you can apply to and frameworks to follow, versus dual factor will just give you ability to prevent somebody using unauthorized account when it gets compromised.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, guys, it's the top of the hour. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. A reminder that you will be receiving an email with a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 1 to 2 business days from now, and it will come from communications@beyondtrust.com. So make sure that that email is whitelisted so you receive the follow-up without any interruption. A big thanks to our experts and to all who attended live today. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for being here, and we will see you at our next webinar. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.